What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy meets daytime television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Clint Eastwood sits down with Joy Behar on The View. And let me tell you, this interview takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe the explosive confrontation that erupted on last night's episode. The tension was palpable from the moment Clint Eastwood walked onto the View set. At 83 years old, the man with no name still commanded respect wherever he went. But something felt different as he took his seat across from the panel. Joy Behar, never one to shy away from controversy, had that familiar glint in her eye, the one that regular viewers know all too well. It's the look she gets right before she drops a verbal bomb that sends shockwaves through the studio. The other co-hosts seemed unusually quiet as the cameras rolled, almost as if they sensed what was brewing beneath the surface. Whoopi Goldberg kept glancing between Joy and Clint with an expression that screamed caution, while the other panelists shuffled their notes nervously. The studio audience, packed with fans eager to see the legendary director and actor, had no idea they were about to witness television history in the making. "So, Clint," Joy began with that trademark smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, "let's talk about your latest film and your interesting political views." The way she emphasized interesting made it clear this wasn't going to be a friendly chat about his decades-long career in Hollywood. Eastwood, wearing his signature squint, leaned back in his chair with the patience of a man who dealt with far worse than daytime television hosts. "Well, Joy, I've always believed in keeping my personal politics separate from my work," Clint replied in that gravelly voice that had intimidated countless on-screen villains. "But I suppose that's not how things work around here anymore." His tone was measured, but anyone paying attention could detect the warning embedded in those words. This was Dirty Harry giving someone a chance to back down before things got ugly. Joy, however, wasn't about to back down. If anything, Eastwood's diplomatic response seemed to embolden her. "Oh, come on, Clint. You can't tell me that your films don't reflect your worldview. I mean, let's be honest about what we're really talking about here." She leaned forward, her voice taking on that prosecutorial tone that had made her famous, or infamous, depending on who you asked. The studio fell eerily quiet, as Eastwood's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Veterans of his films would recognize that, look, it was the same one he wore right before he drew his weapon in countless westerns. "And what exactly are we talking about, Joy?" he asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The microphones had to strain to pick up his words, but the menace behind them was crystal clear. "Your support for certain political figures and policies that, frankly, a lot of people find troubling," Joy pressed on, apparently oblivious to the danger she was walking into. "I mean, how do you reconcile your tough guy image with supporting politicians who—" She paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment before delivering what she thought would be the knockout blow. Whoopi finally jumped in, sensing the conversation spiraling toward disaster. "Joy, maybe we should," she began, but Eastwood held up a hand that stopped her mid-sentence. "When Clint Eastwood tells you to stop talking, you stop talking, even if you're Whoopi Goldberg." "No, let her finish," Eastwood said, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. "I'm curious to hear where this is going." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees as America's most iconic anti-hero prepared to face off against daytime television's most combative host. Joy, either brave or foolish, the jury was still out, decided to double down. Politicians who have made statements that many consider racist, sexist, or just plain dangerous. How do you sleep at night knowing that your influence might be swaying people toward? She trailed off, perhaps finally realizing she might have pushed too far. The silence that followed was deafening. Eastwood sat perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, his famous squint intensifying as he processed what had just been said to him on national television. The other co-hosts looked like they wanted to crawl under their desks, while the studio audience held their collective breath. When Clint finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 5 decades in Hollywood and a lifetime of refusing to back down from anyone. "Joy," he said slowly, each word carefully measured, "I've been called a lot of things in my life. But never, and I mean never, has anyone had the balls to sit across from me and imply that I'm a racist. The profanity hung in the air like smoke from a gunfight. And suddenly, everyone realized this wasn't going to end well. Joy's face flushed red as she realized the magnitude of what she'd just unleashed, but it was too late to take back the words. The die had been cast, and Clint Eastwood was about to show America why you don't pick fights with legends. The confrontation that would define both their careers was just beginning, and what happened next would leave the entire studio in shocked silence. But Joy Behar, true to her confrontational nature, wasn't about to apologize or back down. If anything, seeing Eastwood's controlled anger seemed to fuel her fire even more. "Oh, so now we can't have honest discussions about the political climate?" She shot back, her voice rising an octave as she gestured wildly with her hands. "I'm just asking legitimate questions that millions of Americans want answered." The other co-hosts exchanged panicked glances as they watched this train wreck unfold in real time. This wasn't political discourse. This was character assassination disguised as journalism, and everyone in that studio knew it. Whoopi tried once more to intervene. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after..." But Eastwood's gravelly voice cut through her attempt at damage control like a knife through butter. "Sit down, Whoopi," he said without even looking in her direction, his eyes locked on Joy like a predator sizing up its prey. "The lady asked me a question, and by God, she's going to get an answer." The way he said lady dripped with enough sarcasm to fill the Hudson River, and the studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Joy leaned forward, emboldened by what she mistook for weakness. "That's right, Clint. Let's have that honest conversation. Tell America how you can support politicians who..." But she never got to finish that sentence because Eastwood had heard enough. "You want honest?" Clint's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "Here's honest for you, sweetheart. I've been making movies since before you were probably even born, and I've worked with people of every color, creed, and political belief you can imagine. I've hired more minorities in my films than most directors in this town will in their entire careers, and I've never once asked anyone about their politics before giving them a job." The cameras zoomed in on Joy's face as she realized she might have bitten off more than she could chew, but her ego wouldn't let her retreat now. "That's all well and good, Clint, but actions speak louder than words. And your political endorsements..." "My political endorsements?" Eastwood interrupted, his legendary composure finally beginning to crack. "You mean my right as an American citizen to support whoever the hell I want to support? Last I checked, this was still a free country, despite what you people seem to think." The phrase "you people" hung in the air like a lit stick of dynamite, and Joy pounced on it immediately. "You people? What exactly do you mean by that, Clint?" Her voice took on that sanctimonious tone that had made her the most polarizing figure on daytime television. "Are you referring to women? Liberals? People who dare to question your political choices?" If looks could kill, Joy Behar would have been vaporized on the spot. Eastwood's famous squint intensified to the point where his eyes were practically closed, and when he spoke, his voice carried 5 decades of barely contained fury. "I mean people who think they have the right to sit in judgment of everyone else while hiding behind their television cameras and their political correctness bullshit." The studio audience gasped audibly at the profanity, but Eastwood was just getting started. "You want to know what I really think, Joy? I think you're a coward who gets off on ambushing guests with loaded questions designed to make them look bad. You didn't invite me here to discuss my work or my life. You brought me here to score cheap political points for your liberal audience." Joy's face was now completely red, but whether from embarrassment or rage was impossible to tell. "How dare you come on my show and..." "Your show?" Eastwood let out a bitter laugh that sent chills down everyone's spine. "Last I checked, this was called The View, not the Joy Behar Show. Though I can see how you might get confused, considering how you steamroll over everyone else who tries to speak." The other co-hosts sat in stunned silence, watching their colleague get systematically dismantled by one of Hollywood's most legendary figures. This wasn't just a political disagreement anymore. This was personal, and Clint Eastwood was fighting back with both barrels blazing. "You know what your problem is, Joy?" Eastwood continued, his voice gaining momentum like a freight train. "You live in your little liberal bubble where everyone thinks exactly like you do, and you can't comprehend that decent, hard-working Americans might have different opinions. So instead of trying to understand those differences, you resort to character assassination and moral grandstanding. Joy finally found her voice again, though it trembled with barely controlled fury. I don't have to sit here and listen to some washed-up actor lecture me about washed up. The words hit Eastwood like a physical blow, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. The studio fell so quiet you could hear a pin drop as America's most iconic tough guy processed what had just been said to him on national television. This wasn't just political anymore. Joy had made it personal, and she was about to learn why that was a very, very bad idea. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks and would ultimately change the trajectory of both their careers forever. The point of no return had been crossed, and there was no going back now. The silence that followed Joy's washed-up comment stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Clint Eastwood sat motionless in his chair, his weathered hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles had turned white. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of pure, unadulterated fury. Washed up, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. You think I'm washed up? A terrifying smile spread across his face. Not the kind of smile that brings comfort, but the kind that makes smart people start looking for the nearest exit. Lady, I've been making movies since you were probably still figuring out which end of a microphone to talk into. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Eastwood held up a hand that stopped her cold. No, you had your turn. Now it's mine. He leaned forward in his chair, and suddenly the legendary man with no name was sitting right there in that studio, ready to settle the score. You want to call me washed up? Let's talk about what I've accomplished while you've been sitting behind this desk running your mouth. The venom in his voice was palpable as he continued. I've won 4 Academy Awards, directed some of the most critically acclaimed films of the past 50 years, and served as mayor of a city in California. What exactly have you done besides host a daytime talk show and piss off half of America with your big mouth? Joy's face went from red to purple as the insult hit home. You can't talk to me like that. This is my show, and I don't have to— Shut up, Eastwood snapped, his voice cutting through her protest like a whip crack. You started this fight, and now you're going to finish it. You want to sit there and lecture me about politics and morality? You don't know the first damn thing about either one. The other co-hosts looked like they wanted to crawl under the table as Eastwood's legendary temper finally erupted in full force. This wasn't the controlled, squinting gunfighter from the movies. This was raw, unfiltered rage from a man who'd had enough of being disrespected. I've lived through more history than you've read about in books, he continued, his voice rising with each word. I've worked with legends, created art that will outlast both of us, and earned the respect of people who actually matter. And you think you can sit there in your little bubble and pass judgment on me? Joy tried once more to regain control of the situation. Clint, if you would just calm down and— Calm down? Eastwood's laugh was bitter and cold. You spend 20 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on national television, call me a racist, and then tell me to calm down? Lady, you've got some serious balls, I'll give you that. Too bad you don't have the brains to match. The studio audience was completely silent now, torn between horror and fascination as they watched this legendary confrontation unfold. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, but nobody in that studio was thinking about anything except the verbal massacre happening right in front of them. You know what your real problem is, Joy? Eastwood's voice dropped back to that dangerous whisper. You're jealous. You're jealous that after 5 decades in this business, I'm still relevant, still making movies, still commanding respect from people who matter. Meanwhile, you're stuck here on this couch, desperately trying to stay relevant by picking fights with your guests. That hit Joy like a physical blow. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. For the first time in her career, Joy Behar was speechless, and everyone in America could see it happening live on television. Eastwood wasn't finished. You want to know what I really think about people like you? You're everything that's wrong with this country. You hide behind your politics and your supposed moral superiority, but deep down you're just a bitter, angry person who gets off on tearing other people down. He stood up slowly, his full height casting a shadow over the panel. I've wasted enough of my time on this garbage. I came here thinking I was going to have a conversation about my work and my life. Instead, I got ambushed by a wannabe journalist who thinks character assassination passes for intelligent discourse. Whoopi finally found her voice. Clint, please, let's just take a breath and... No, Whoopi, he said firmly but not unkindly. I'm done here. I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's trying to make me look bad for their own political agenda. He turned his attention back to Joy, who was still struggling to form words. You picked the wrong guy to mess with today, lady. I've faced down movie studios, directors, critics, and politicians who make you look like amateur hour. Did you really think you could take me down with some half-assed gotcha questions and personal attacks? Joy finally managed to speak, though her voice was shaky. You can't just walk out in the middle of an interview. Watch me, Eastwood said with finality. He reached up and removed his microphone, dropping it on the coffee table with a loud thunk that echoed through the stunned studio. This isn't an interview. It's an ambush, and I don't have time for this bullshit. As he turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Joy one last time. You know, in all my years in Hollywood, I've worked with some real pieces of work, but I've never met anyone who combined incompetence and arrogance quite like you do. Congratulations, that's quite an achievement. The studio erupted as Clint Eastwood walked off the view set, leaving Joy Behar sitting there with her mouth hanging open and her reputation in tatters. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what would become one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. As the show cut to commercial break, one thing was abundantly clear. Joy Behar had picked a fight with a legend, and she'd gotten absolutely destroyed. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning, and America had just witnessed why you never mess with Clint Eastwood.